Kate Devlin, who is the Senior Lecturer in Social and Cultural AI at King's College London. She's going to be the moderator for this session on trust in autonomous systems. I'm pretty hopeful that you're going to come up with some ideas around what it actually means to create trust and trustworthiness.
We'll try. We want to go at 40 minutes, but we'll give it a go.
Yeah, well, you know, how much time does anyone ever have? Like, how long did it take you to get your PhD and everything?
Oh, not long, not long.
About 45 minutes. No, of course not. It's wonderful to be able to learn from you today. I'm going to hand over the stage, but before I do, I'm just going to say, please do tweet #CogX2021, and please also comment in the Hopin kind of browser in the app. Either in the QA or in the chats. We love to hear from you, and we do take your questions. But now I will pass over to Kate. Thank you so much, and enjoy.
Thanks, Alice. Welcome, everyone, to the final panel. Thank you for coming along to spend this last 40 minutes with us on this incredibly hot and sunny day here. This is a panel about trusted autonomous systems. And AI, machine learning, and autonomous systems are being really widely deployed now, but we don't always understand the impacts of their use. So what does it mean to have trust in these systems, and who is responsible for making those systems trustworthy? What are the pitfalls? Are we able to mitigate the risks without restricting our progress? We're going to have a look at the risks of adopting AI at scale and explore why industry needs to be attentive of this idea of trust. I'm Kate Devlin. I'm Senior Lecturer in Social and Cultural AI at King's College London. I'm a computer scientist working in the digital humanities, so I'm really enjoying this interdisciplinary approach. And I'm also a co-investigator on the UKRI Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Hub, more of which you'll hear about during this panel. On our panel today, we have Dr. Jack Stilgoe. Jack is an Associate Professor of Science and Technology Studies at University College London, and he runs the Driverless Futures project, driverless-futures.com. And he's also the author of Who's Driving Innovation, published by Palgrave. So really well versed in being able to talk about this. And we also have Professor Gopal Ramchurn. Gopal is a Professor of Artificial Intelligence, a Turing Fellow, and Fellow of the Institution of Engineering and Technology. He's the Director of the UKRI Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Hub and co-director of the Shell Southampton Centre for Maritime Futures. His research is all about the design of responsible artificial intelligence for real-world socio-technical applications, and that includes things like energy systems and disaster management. And his research involves applying techniques from machine learning and data science and game theory. So thank you both for coming along to this panel today. I'm going to ask you to start by giving us a bit of background, a bit of a positional statement about trusted autonomous systems. So Jack, if you'd like to go first for about 5 minutes and tell us about your work.
Thanks, Kate. And thank you for getting the social scientist to go first. It's nice. Normally we have to follow the real academics. So as a social scientist, I think words matter. I think when we talk about trust, we need to be clear what it means in terms of social relationships, not just in terms of what engineers would like it to mean. I'm just going to start off by thinking about the words trust, autonomous, and system, and see if that can help clarify things, or maybe it helps sort of complicate things in potentially constructive ways. So the first word that I have a problem with is the word autonomous, right? Autonomous suggests technologies that are in some way self-governing, self-driving, right? The self-driving car being the archetypal autonomous system. What does that hide? Well, it hides all of the stuff behind the robot, if you like, all the infrastructures that make a robot work, all of the hidden labor, the stuff going on behind the curtain that gives AI this sort of magical property. But we know we had Kate Crawford talking this morning about ghost work and all of the dirty secrets of AI that make it real. And these technologies are also driven by human values, right? They're driven by a particular idea about a desirable future, about who might benefit in that future, and that's something that citizens might not agree with. And if they don't agree, what right do they have? What ability do they have to opt out? Is often the question. So the next word would be system. If we think that autonomous artifacts acts are not as autonomous as they claim, what is it that makes the system work? Well, these things are always assemblages of things and people, and often the people get backgrounded while the things get foregrounded. And it's not just about the technologies themselves. Often these systems include the people that are using the systems, the people that are governing those systems that make those things work. So in that context, what does it mean to trust? Now, trust for me as a social scientist is to do with relationships, right? It's hard to really think in sensible terms about trust in a technology, but we can have more or less trusting relationships, and we can have trustworthy systems. But trust is not something that engineers can build. It's not in engineers' gift, right? It's something that they might have to earn, and they might have to earn it through institutions, right? So we have to think about the institutions that govern these technologies. When engineers talk about trust, often it's done in a very paternalistic and sometimes very patronizing way. So, you know, they might invoke psychological ideas about, for example, algorithm aversion, the idea that members of the public might exaggerate the risks of robots because they don't like automated things, and therefore they might have an emotional response to this rather than the rational assessment of risk that an engineer might have. And often public views are seen as being somehow aberrant and the sort of thing that needs to be corrected, or that will be changed with more information, with education. Trust should not be seen in those ways, right? We should seek to understand what the basis of public concerns and hopes and fears is, and seek to engineer trustworthy institutions with those things in mind. It's not just about ensuring that systems do what they claim to do, right? Performance. It's not just about system performance. Trust is also about the processes through which technologies work, and it's about the purposes of those technologies, right? So I'd encourage us to think about those 3 Ps, not just performance, but also process and purpose, which means that, for example, the way in which we construct trust relationships around some digital technologies, where, you know, we expect users to just understand the privacy trade-offs that they're making and tick and click, right? And we pretend that that's some sense of informed consent. That's going to be woefully inadequate when it comes to autonomous systems. So we have to fundamentally rethink trust. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. That's a great way to kick off. Gopal, I'm going to go to you now, and you can tell us about your work and how it's embedded in trusted autonomous systems.
Thanks, Kate, and then thanks, Jack, for making it hard for me to in my position. But I'll try and do a defense of the engineers and the scientists who build those systems, and I'm not going to get bogged down with the terminologies and the definitions of trust. But I'd like to make it clear that when we talk about autonomous systems, we're talking about a broad range of systems. So algorithmic systems that make decisions automatically. So they could be very simple algorithms, but they take away control from the users. They could be robots out at sea, in the air, or on our roads. Or they could be systems that drive face recognition. For example, or our search engines or the apps on our phone. So we have lots of autonomous systems, as I see it, as many of my colleagues see it, in the Task Hub, in the UKRI Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Hub. It's a broad range of systems that we need to look at when you talk about trust. My background, as you said earlier, Kate, is largely in AI, in optimization, machine learning, using very fundamental techniques from mathematics, from engineering. And applied to a range of sectors. So I've looked at systems that automate grids, so power grids. So looking at how we can reliably deliver electricity to homes, and then how we can enable users within their homes, within their intimate space, to use that energy and respond to intermittent power from the grid, coming from solar or wind. I've looked at systems working with defense companies, the STL and others, to support disaster relief operations. So working with emergency responders on the ground to deploy AI systems that they can use in their work in very dynamic and uncertain environments, to save lives, to minimize casualties in those sorts of situations. So very difficult, very real environments, and where we have actually gone out and worked with real users. And over the last 10 years, I've seen evolution in terms of thinking in the ICT, in the engineering community, and all those projects funded by UKRI, is this evolution to understand that the human has to play a significant part in this. It can't be just about the systems. And then many of these projects have transitioned from being purely engineering focused to being about how do we embed the understandings that people have of these systems, get them to work with people more efficiently, more effectively, and get people to trust them, which is where we initially came up with the idea of the Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Hub, which is a large program of work. It's a strategic investment by the UK government. It's a £33 million program that involves over 20 universities, each focusing on different aspects of trust, looking at the purely engineering elements, so the functionality of these systems, some looking at the notions of trust in terms of security, so looking at cybersecurity, looking at very specific notions of trust, and they define trust in very specific ways sometimes for secure systems. We have others looking at the governance and regulation of these systems, working with the regulators and looking at historical failures of autonomous systems to learn how do we better build these systems, but how do we better regulate them as well, and implement the processes that Jack talks about in terms of how they are going to be used in reality. And I think there are huge challenges that we now face in terms of building trust in those systems for real products and services that we have out there, because we've seen the failure of big tech when it came to data management, privacy, with facial recognition being a key issue, and now the new EU AI regulation being pushed forward to try and fix all of that before it gets worse. So there are a number of things I'm sure we'll discuss today that will relate to these challenges, and I hope within the program that we have running for the next 4 years, we will address some of these challenges.
So despite my attempt to pit two experts against each other, you've actually got quite a lot of overlap and quite a lot of agreement on things. And so I just want to say, if anyone wants to pose their questions now, please do type those into the stage Q&A or stage chat on the right-hand side of your screen. Okay, so let's have some discussion points. So this, you've both talked about this question of trust, and Gopal, you've mentioned working with real users, and Jack, you've said about the responsibility. So who is responsible for engendering that trust? Who takes the blame when it goes wrong, and who should be providing trust in the first place?
I'll get back to Jack's 3 Ps. I think, which was people, purpose, and
performance, process, and purpose.
Performance, processing, and purpose. So the fourth, I think, letter missing in there is O. I think it's ownership, and I think who owns the system or the process, who owns the environment within which these things are deployed. And what got me to think about this was the panel where we had Dame Vivian Hunt talking about capitalism, and talking about stakeholder capitalism, looking at how large corporates need to really think about how they're perceived by the public, by their users, by governments, as being accountable to them, caring about who will use their systems, caring about protecting the rights of their users, and the impact of the technology that they deploy. So if we can't trust the owners of the technology, it will be very hard for us to trust, everything that falls that is built by them. I think that's a key issue for me that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Jack.
So, thanks, Gopal. I mean, what I'd add, there's a sort of normative question, right, of who should be responsible, which is obviously a real concern of governance, and something that, as Gopal says, needs to be addressed before we get to the situation of, realizing the harms of technology and having to come up with fixes, because those fixes, technological fixes never fix things, right? They are partial and often create problems themselves. but often we realize the effects of technology too late, by which time we're already sort of locked into them. So it's crucial to think about responsibility upstream. And yet we need to engage with the reality of responsible innovation, which is, you know, the words of the environmental sociologist Ulrich Beck. He said that innovation, you know, is characterized by organized irresponsibility, he calls it, right? There's a danger that every person, and there are countless people involved in the system, as I said at the start, it becomes really easy for every person to think that somebody else is holding the car keys, right? And so responsibility ends up threadbare around the system. And you can look at that in the sort of on the grand scale in terms of who is responsible for the futures that are created through technology. You can also look at it, you know, in the dynamics of a particular moment involving an autonomous system. So I spend a lot of time looking at self-driving cars and the governance of those. And we've already seen in some of the fatal crashes involving self-driving cars, this feature that Madeleine Ellish calls a human crumple zone, right? In which it becomes extremely easy for regulators and innovators to blame failures of a technology on human error. And we know that, right, this isn't something that's new about artificial intelligence. We've known this about autopilots and aeroplanes for decades. So I think we need to be really careful when we are asking questions about responsibility to understand the reality of you know, liability discussions as they play out around autonomous systems. So,
I mean, cars is a particular area that you work on, Jack. Can you say, what are the specific perceptions of trust in that area? What's the public understanding of trust when it comes to things like self-driving cars?
So one of the things that we did a couple of years ago, on behalf of the British government, we did a large public dialogue exercise, which I think is still the largest anybody's done in the world, looking at public attitudes to the acceptability of possible self-driving systems. And that's where, you know, the ideas that I put across about, you know, trust being more than just does it do what we'd like it to do, right? People, when you ask them to talk about self-driving cars, it's interesting that they immediately jump to the question of, well, who are these going to be for, right? So you know, engineers would like to, you know, engage with the question, for example, how can we make sure this thing is safe? And they might, when prompted, you know, and Gopal knows this well, recognize the question, how safe is safe enough, is a really complicated question, right? In public discussion, you realize that a key question is going to be safe enough for what?
Yeah.
Right? So it depends. If this is a technology that's just going to benefit Elon Musk and his friends, then I, as a citizen, am going to be extremely skeptical if these things are shuttling around my community. But if I see that this technology has genuinely emancipatory benefits and opens up transport systems to people that couldn't previously access mobility, right, then that changes the trust relationship fundamentally. And it's, you know, in some ways we know all this. We know that people trust car-based transport modes very differently from how they trust aeroplane-based transport modes. And that's not because people are stupid, right, and they are afraid of flying. It's because people have a certain sense of the controllability of those systems, the potential for catastrophic threats, the institutions that are governing those systems, and all the rest.
So yeah, it seems as if those perceptions and those narratives can shift quite a bit when you reframe the question, and I think that's a really interesting thing. And I want to bring Gopal in here because he was talking about energy systems, and I know he's got a really pertinent case study here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in terms of public perception, I think there's, as we've seen, and we're looking at this problem in some of the research project we have within the Task Hub. We have an issue with getting the right understandings of these systems as well out there. When we talk about self-driving cars, very often people think, you know, the Tesla is a self-driving car. We're using the wrong term for the technology. When there are different levels of autonomy that we talk about in those systems. So when we talk about an autonomous car, fully autonomous car, it doesn't have a driver. It should not have a driver. And then the trust relationship between the users and the vehicle is one where it will depend on a number of things that, for example, what Jack talks about, was the institutional trust that you have in this, so whether it's been built, or does it look reliable, does it collect data that serves your purpose rather than the manufacturer's purpose. But then when you have a system where a car is semi-autonomous, so we can talk about in terms of autonomy levels, but it's not 100% autonomous. You still have a relationship with it as a driver. So you have a driver who has to be there waiting for the system to fail in order to take over. So the system is autonomous, but not fully autonomous. And then the trust questions are very, very different. It's all about the driver, a relation between the driver and the vehicle. So the users, the actors in this system that need to think about trust will depend on the level of autonomy that you give to that system. The example I will talk about in terms of energy systems will give you also a very concrete view on the use of the wrong terms when you talk about autonomous systems is when we talk about smart meters. So we talk about smart meters, and the first smart meters that were invented back in the 1970s were electronic metering systems. So they would basically collect data in a digital form and send that data over from your home, so monitor your energy consumption and send that to the utility to automatically bill you, but also to shut you down if they wanted. So if you didn't pay your bills, it would let them shut you down, so cut off your electricity, but also allow you to pay remotely. So there's a benefit, and there's a potential loss of control over your home in that way. And as we go over the last 10 years, we've seen these systems evolve, and people are now asking questions about who's this data for. So the system is collecting data about our behaviors, about the appliances we have in our homes, right? So they know what films we watch on TV, on Netflix, based on the data that's collected at the smart meter. So people are worried about these systems, and therefore will reject them, as we've seen in the last few years. And then the technologies are reacting to that by saying, okay, we're going to collect data in coarser ways. We're going to collect data not at sub-second frequency. We're going to collect data at 15-minute intervals so that we don't have a view on what's going on TV. And then research will come out 5 years later saying, oh, we can actually extract that information from that 15-minute 15-minute data. So we're always playing catch up with technology when it comes to public trust in those systems. So I think we need a more forward-thinking way of adopting these technologies. And when we tell people these are smart systems, we need to be very clear about who is it smart for, what actually you're going to benefit from within the system, what risks they expose you to in terms of your loss of control, what others are allowed to do to you based on you using that system. I think that's a key challenge that's very difficult to figure out, because you need to think about what's going to happen next, how the technology will evolve before you deploy the system.
I think that's absolutely, I can see that. Do we start by saying, oh, will this car crash and what will happen if it has control? And then we move to, does this car know how I'm going about my business? To, are they tracking where I'm going and all my journeys? And of course, there is an element of all of that. So people need to know all the possibilities of it for sure. And that kind of leads us into one of the final points to discuss, which is around the broader field of responsible research and innovation, this landscape where, what should we be considering and who is holding the power when it comes to things like trusted autonomous systems? Jack, do you want to go first with that?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of work on responsible innovation, attempting to drag some of this discussion upstream and get people to think about it at an early stage, recognizing that particularly when it comes to software, the potential for transformative change to happen extremely quickly and to lead to a sort of future shock where regulators are taken by surprise makes this challenge particularly acute. And therefore we need to raise these concerns early, and we need especially university researchers to play that role of horizon scanning for some of these things. So responsible innovation, is about trying to get a new set of questions into the debate at an early stage, trying to anticipate some of these concerns and think about what some sort of legitimate responses might be to some of them. One of them, which is, which I think is particular to artificial intelligence, that I think is raised by Gopal's points about, the claims that come from Tesla about full autonomy, right? Is that the flip side of trust is hype. And you need to engage with hype being a problematic thing. You can't just say this is a technology that will only do good things, right? And cause no problems, and expect members of the public to go, oh, okay, yeah, and then wait and see and sign up or not sign up or whatever, right? It's far more complicated than that. People's responses to these things, just as their responses to any other political act, and hype is a political act, will be to criticize hypocrisy, to say, well, you're not doing what you promised, and yes, the finger pointing might be a bit off, but hype, I think, is a serious and real problem. And I think one of the great values of university research in this area is being able to challenge some of that hype.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm not just saying that because we are three academics talking about this. And actually, Gopal, I was going to ask you, how important to you is it that you center the research done by TAS with good, responsible innovation?
Responsible research innovation is a key theme, a program within the TAS Hub. We're doing a lot of work to try and translate that into meaningful toolkits, information that people can use to apply it in their research, but also in industry. We're running skills workshops that will help industry understand what we mean by RRI, why we think it is important. But I am most worried when I hear questions from industry who come to us and say, how can I make my product or service more trusted? Right. It is a good question to ask my colleagues in the business school, my colleagues in the marketing department, and we do have projects that look at that as well. But in terms of whether we should make an untrustworthy, I'm not sure it's the right word, but a product that's clearly working against the user, or has the potential to work against the user or society, and turn that into a trustworthy or trusted product or service is the wrong thing to ask us to do.
Absolutely, yeah. Nothing looks less trustworthy than the attempt to build trust in something that isn't trustworthy, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, and that leads us into the first of we've got 3 questions here, and this lends itself very well to this one, which is, what about this technology performing worse for some populations? For example, we know that facial recognition works worse for dark skins. What does it mean to be safe when it's riskier for a certain section of the community, as Black pedestrians?
Jeff, if I can jump in, if you say it doesn't work well for dark faces, I'm a bit dark, so I think it would work well for me then, because then people won't be able, systems won't be able to recognize me, and therefore my data will be safe. And obviously, that aside, it is a key concern. And the EU AI regulation, for example, does try to address this question of bias and systems not being built for all types of publics, all kinds of users, and companies will be forced to acknowledge those or test against those particular biases. And there are tools being developed in the research community to help with that. But I think we also have a public engagement question. Will people actually ever want to be seen by these systems in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think in terms of the particular issue of skin color, it's really interesting how that has surfaced a debate whose ramifications go much wider than just the question of facial recognition and data. And there's a danger that the way that debate is interpreted by tech companies is, oh, well, okay, we can just fix that, right? And we'll probably fix it with more data. Okay, if you want, so we recognize that that might have been an oversight, right? Our data sources are biased in some way, therefore we just need to expand the data set. I think, the far more profound question is who these systems actually benefit. And there, the politics of technology that mean that marginalized groups are more harmed and less likely to benefit from technological change than people already in positions of privilege, right? That's a far bigger question that, yes, we should discuss and use this as a way to generate that discussion, but we're nowhere near opening up that question yet.
No, we're definitely, there's been acknowledgement of these problems over the past couple of years. There's been a massive surge in the popularity and the discussions around AI ethics, but solutions for them and really uncovering the depth of the power differential there is still so much work to be done, I think. And another sort of big question here as well, trust in autonomous systems becomes especially challenging when they're deployed in the battlefield. How do we minimize the disconnect between human operators and AI systems when there are lives at stake? Yeah, these are tough questions.
They are tough questions. So I would just say that the battlefield is in some ways a unique use case, right? In that you can, and historically technologies have always been deployed, tested with and on soldiers and against enemies in ways that would be regarded as unethical within the population at large. So in some ways, we might not be able to extrapolate from those situations, but it's interesting that the discussion about lethal autonomous weapons has at least raised the possibility of bans on certain categories of technologies, which is sometimes a difficult thing to raise. It has been really difficult to raise on facial recognition technology, right? If you're there saying, well, facial recognition technology looks so bad that actually maybe like an atomic bomb, right? Maybe it is, like Luke Stark has been arguing, so bad that you should just ban it, right? Then you're seen as also banning the beneficial uses of the technology that might be. So it's a complicated one, but maybe we do need to have that discussion about categories of technology that we regard as socially toxic.
I think that's really exactly it. I mean, I'm a tech optimist. I want to think that the tech that we develop can do good in the world, but I'm not so naive to think there are no bad actors out there. And certainly when it comes to something like weapons, that's a whole other issue that is currently being discussed at UN level. So it goes wider into the question of governance that we just really don't have time for in the scope of this panel. But and who sets that agenda? And is it a governmental thing? Is there a higher level? Yeah, that's a really big question. So I'm going to move on to the final question, and not because we're trying to duck out of discussing autonomous weapons, just that we simply don't have the time to do that here. So the final question. Marketing material and media representations of autonomous vehicles often show, for example, passengers sitting watching a movie while the car drives itself. So how will that gap between hype and reality impact public trust? Oh,
it's a one that gets me doesn't get me out of bed every day, but gets me annoyed every time I see an announcement of self-driving cars to be allowed next year. For example, right? So it's not just about the pictures of people driving, sitting in the back of cars and watching videos or being driven by a fully automated vehicle. It's the fact that we get the terminology right. We're telling people that, for example, automated lane keeping system vehicles, so vehicles that can drive themselves while on the motorway, only on the motorway, within certain lines, are self-driving cars. We're telling the public that's the case. The DFT comes out with an announcement like this, the newspapers pick it up, the BBC picks it up, and everyone believes the autonomous vehicles are really going to be on the roads. Mm-hmm. And then they get in the car and they think, okay, I can take my iPad now and watch a movie, because of all the hype around this that's been created by a number of actors, not just the designers of the system, but the media, and even misunderstandings in government about how these systems should be described. So yeah, it's going to have huge impacts, and I think all of these actors have responsibility in communicating what the technology can do for the user, and how and government has a role in regulating how these maybe the messaging should be done when we come and talk about these sorts of systems. It's not oversells the abilities of these systems, and I don't know. I don't have the answer yet to how to do that.
So, I mean, maybe I could just offer one sort of appendix to what I said before on hype, which is to ask. I mean, I think we can all work out what the incentives to hype are, right? What are the incentives to correct that hype? And I think those are much harder to put your finger on, right? If you're, and to an extent, we all are, right? Because we are all, here at CogX, we are all to an extent inside the bubble. So what are our incentives to burst that bubble? Right, because it's clear that when attention and social capital, financial capital are flowing towards one particular area, you don't want to be the person that that is sticking a needle into the bubble that is gloriously inflating around you, and that's what I worry about. So in the dynamic that Gopal describes, right, where you have companies, governments, maybe NGOs and others, sort of all of whom know that they are implicated in perpetuating bullshit, right? At some level, it's bullshit. And sort of they all know that, yes, okay, it's just maybe playful exaggeration, but actually we can see that these things are socially harmful and they will impact trust down the line, right? Because people will want to hold that hype to account. So I think we need to find ways to incentivize the correcting of hype. I don't quite know what that looks like, right? I think a lot of it comes from good tech journalism, right? Investigative tech journalism, tech journalists who don't see their job as cheerleading, they see their job as, as with any other form of political reporting, of holding power to account, right? But I think the sooner we can look at technology in that sort of way, the sooner we can have a more sensible discussion about what it actually takes to make these technologies work, right? Because that's the discussion that society needs to have.
Great. And I think we are humans who have all been subjected to many years of interesting sci-fi that's fed us certain narratives, and it's. Don't blame yourself too much if you're really looking forward to your flying self-driving car, for example, because that's what we've been sold all along the way. We're just here to burst that bubble, by the way. So thank you very much. Just to finish off, I want to ask. I'm going to reduce it all down to one word. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of trusted autonomous systems? Gopal, optimistic or pessimistic?
Optimistic.
Yay, Jack.
I hate binaries. I don't want a world in which we have to be either optimistic or pessimistic, right? I want a world in which we can design governance so that it works for us.
That's an optimistic view, I think. No, yes, I think it's an optimistic view. There you go.
We could indeed, yes.
Okay, good. That's fine. That's great. I consider you both to be hopeful about the future, or at least working towards a future where we can be hopeful. Let's put it like that.